G'day guys, Mike with the Outer Circle, and today we're looking at the World Championships of Warhammer preview. So, tuned in for the live stream yesterday, watched a fair chunk of it over on Kirioth's channel. I'll tell you what, these presenters, the rate, the pace they were talking at, I think I know where all that cocaine in Nottingham is going, because, yeah, they were keen. Anyway, so, where do we want to start? I think we'll start at the top. So, Orican the Diviner. Yep. At least he's no longer Finecast. But a lot of these new Necron sculpts suffer from, I don't know, something about the way things are posed. They don't have that strength, the solidity of being posed on the ground. I personally find the old Necrons, the ones where they were still sort of the mindless automata, the very Terminator-esque, T-800 Terminator-esque, the cybernetic menace with no morals, no fears, no personality, just a cold, merciless killing machine. I found that more interesting. And the 2 feet placed firmly on the ground, solidity that says, you can shoot me with everything you've got, I'm just going to stand right back up and keep coming. I find that sort of posing more intimidating than this. And I'm not saying that this is bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's perfectly fine. It's just not my cup of tea is what I'm getting at. I like my Necrons being cold, mindless, robotic killing machines, not more and more space Egyptians with dynasties and getting more and more personality as time goes on, where it's Egyptians meets zombies in machine form. That's far less interesting to me visually. And I mean, the model's passable, it's fine, but it's not for me. Asmodai. So the first picture we got of him was this. Well, dropping his silent but deadlies. Yeah. So interestingly, he is skewering a Mark II helmet on the ground with his sword, which is a bit of an odd choice. Now, hear me out. What is going on here? If he's decapitated this Marine, why is he then plunged the sword into the helmet? If the Marine, his body was on the ground and the sword was going through the back of his head, that I could understand. But as it is, it's actually really strange. Cutting off someone's head and then stabbing the sword through it, the helmet, to, rest on. That posing is really weird. But as a miniature, he's probably one of the ones who... The old model was perfectly good. There were models that were in greater need of updating. Probably Ezekiel, I think, needed an update more than Asmodai. That's just personal preference. I think the Ezekiel model is lovely regardless. Maybe even Belial, because Belial is going to look incredibly small next to the current crop of Terminators that are coming out. And probably Samuel, Master of the Ravenwing, another one who could really use an update, because they're the guys who are more... I don't know, I was never drawn to playing Dark Angels because of Asmodai. It was more the first company and the second company elites that really drew my attention in. Anyway, you don't have to build Asmodai, it looks like, with the farts, which is neat. So they seem entirely optional. You can build him with just the skull nacelles on the backpack. The hoodless helmet, I think, looks awful. It looks like try-hard, edgy wannabe. No. The old original helmet looked much better on the old school model. So keep the hood on him, don't add the smoke effects, and you have a perfectly fine model here. And in fact, change the backpack out. Probably a decent 30k character for the Dark Angels. Strangely enough. Because the scale of the big new characters, I mean, it's going to be a 40mm base. he would actually fit in pretty well. So maybe a Praetor conversion opportunity for people. So yeah, that is Asmodite. Going on from there, we have new Deathwing Knights, which at a distance, zoomed out, they look like Nurgle Terminators. Because there's an optical illusion going on with the eye slits and the bit of gold trim running down the center of the face. The gold is a reddish tone, very bronzed, which is very similar to the eyes. So if one is looking at it at a distance, it looks like the sort of same visor as Typhus Calon has. So, yeah. Interesting that that's the illusion that we all see. Anyway, the helmets look more like a Grey Knight helmet than the standard sort of Indomitus Terminators. They do still have the little, like, breather vents or whatever these little pistons are on each side of the jaw, which is fine. You know, it ties it back into the Indomitus, and it has the Indomitus sort of three crested ridges on top of the helmet. So you can definitely see the sort of background where it came from. It looks to me like these are the existing plastic bodies for the new 40k Terminators, but with a front torso change out, as well as shoulder pads and arms. So, yeah, looks like Asmodee's farts are being sold by this watcher. That's neat. Good for Asmodee. He's picked up a great career on OnlyFans. Also, you can buy his bathwater. That's interesting. I mean, probably. As far as the Terminators go, though, the bodies with the cloaked sort of chest, they look great. I think they did a really good job on them. They're not overly detailed. It's not like the Inner Circle Knight Cenobium over on Forge World, where there is so much going on that you could just lose sight of the model underneath. These are really tasteful. The swords look great. They, again, look much better than the great swords on the Forge World miniatures. And the shields are quite tasteful. They are not full of overblown trim, because it would have been so easy to do what they did on the Blade Guard veterans in 40k, where they had like entire rib cages and upper torsos of, you know, dead Marine heroes strapped to the front of shields. That Grim Derp would have been really easy to fall into as a trap. They didn't fall into that. So that's great. Thank God for that. They did a good job here. Then we have the maces. Now, I like these maces a lot. I don't really like them for these particular models. The old maces that looked very much like a religious relic, you know, the holy hand grenade of Antioch slapped onto the end of a handle on the old Deathwing Knights, they were too big, okay? The head of the mace was probably 30% too large for the miniature. But if you shrank it down, same size shaft on it, but smaller head on the mace, and kept that same religious looking mace and put it onto these guys, I think that would look incredible. Because what he's suggesting is that, you know, they are a religious order, a religious sect of knights, caught up in the sort of gothic imagery. And I think that's really powerful. The bare heads, of course, and the rebreathers, they're fine, they do the job. But they wouldn't be my go-to, I don't think, as they are implemented. I think the old Deathwing Knights, completely bare skin with the hood over the top, looked much, much nicer than these sort of half face mask, jawline mask things going on, which are very Primaris. And the only downside is people are going to want to use these in Heresy armies, which is, they can do that, that's fine. But the scale is going to be very off, because these are huge. These new Terminators are gigantic, and they're going to look really out of place standing a full head taller than all the other Terminators in one's army. So that might cause some issues for people. Alright, over on Age of Sigmar, we got a release here for basically the Crypt Ghouls faction. And I will always call them that. I don't care about calling them anything else. Interesting that Yushorin has come back. For those who don't know, he's basically the founder of the Strigoi bloodline in Warhammer Fantasy. The brother of Neferata, I believe, was the original lineage. That's the first of the vampires, the Queen Neferata. And he's the one who sort of made being a vampire mainstream in Warhammer Fantasy, was one of the OG goats. And so to have him brought back in Age of Sigmar is very interesting, because we've never really got a legitimate miniature for him. In fact, he's all in these old world novels that you can read, which aren't bad, about like sort of the rise and fall of Nagash and vampires, and he pops up in there quite a bit. And he founded a successful kingdom in the realm of Strigos, and ruled that quite successfully until, madness and all of that. And when the Strigoi basically failed in Warhammer Fantasy, the old lore, back when they were first introduced in 6th edition Warhammer Fantasy, the Strigoi were very much similar to von Carstein vampires, proud, overbearing nobles who ruled their subjects wisely, but of course fed on like murderers and criminals and that sort of thing. And when an Orc War sweeps through, absolutely crushes their civilization, and the other vampires won't give them any refuge or take them in, so they take to dwelling in graveyards and feasting on the dead. And feasting on corpses mutates and maddens the Strigoi vampires. And their followers are predominantly ghouls, because ghouls are human cannibals who hang around in the crypts and the graveyards. And, it was all very, very dark, the Strigoi backstory. Fantastic. So this character, as he looks, is just amazing. But I really, really like this model. But why is he now a 20-foot tall, solid, bronze demigod, as it were? It's just this hero hammer thing that goes on with Age of Sigmar, the Flanderizing of the setting, where it's like, well, you know who's the big boss, because they're the 100mm tall guy in the middle of the army. Nobody could be a little guy and lead an army. He needs to be on a dragon or be 100mm tall. 4 inches tall, by the way, for those playing at home. It's just a weird design choice that they go so big with characters in Sigmar. Like Archaon is a perfect example of this. The old Archaon on Drogar, the steed, was perfect. But they had to make that stupid 3-headed abomination for Archaon to ride on in Age of Sigmar, and it's just infinitely worse as a miniature. And I'll never quite understand it. But yeah, that's a little backstory for where the cool Strigoi backstory that I'm really into, the whole we're crazed Bretonians thing going on in Sigmar, doesn't do anything for me. But he is amazing. So, yeah, I'll give him full points, full credit there. He looks fantastic. And this is actually a miniature I would want to build and paint. I will freely admit that. It looks amazing. And then as we roll down, we get to see that there is a whole bunch of other stuff released with this faction. So that's interesting. They gave us a bunch of ghouls and crypt horrors and things like that. So, yep, cool. So now we get to actually look at them here. So they basically took the existing ghouls, which I thought were fine as models, and they gave them weapons and battle standard. Now, again, I can't speak for everyone, but I really, really liked the old Crypt Ghouls, because the old Crypt Ghouls, they had that golem energy, that meth addict energy, the type of people who would rip their catheter out in a hospital and try and strangle you with it, that madman energy, just devolved raving psychotics who use whatever weapons come to hand. They don't use real weapons. They don't even dig them up out of the ground or anything like that. They don't use tactics. They don't use halberds and armor. And no, they're psychopathic madmen who will, they will headbutt glass and keep headbutting it because they saw their own reflection and they were scared of it. And they will fuck themselves up fighting it. That is more interesting to me as a faction, that it's just a bunch of ravening madmen who don't know how to use tools but will gouge someone's eyes out in a fight. I don't know. Maybe that's just me that finds that more interesting. So on the whole, a lot of these releases do nothing for me. Then we get to these guys who, well, we already have Vargulfs and Vargeists and Crypt Horrors and all of that. What niche are these guys really occupying there that those sort of larger 40mm based monsters didn't? Those ogre-sized creatures. It can't be much of a niche that they're occupying, I don't reckon. So, yeah, they don't really do anything for me there. It's neat that they exist, but yeah. And then the Vargulf Cordia, which, hey, this makes perfect sense to me. So the Vargulf is like a bestial, devolved vampire giving into their most base instincts. Would make sense that there would be a Strigoi version of that, where, you know, he's got mange and all the fur is falling off of his diseased, rotting corpse body, and just the long, gangling limbs. Very much reminds me of like the Morgul's limbs. Just something very creepy about it, in a good way though. So that's another like near perfect model, I think. Looks great. They need to paint the swords differently though. They don't look creepy and mangy and infected enough. Cyber, not even cyber, like mystical Pope here, yeah, doesn't do a thing for me. I don't need to be told that there are spellcasters amongst this faction, because I'm going to continue to call them Strigoi, okay? What's interesting about the Strigoi, one of the many things that's interesting about them, is that, yes, there are a bunch of devolved psychotic madmen who won't use a sword. They would rather use their fingernails to gouge someone's eyes out. That's all good and well. But when put on the spot, it turns out they're actually phenomenal necromancers, because, hell, they're vampires, you know, and they were once vampire lords. And so you unexpectedly get this psychotic meth addict in the street who starts whipping out skeleton units, summoning them onto the board. That was a really cool aspect of the Strigoi, and there was an interesting story about that in that 6th edition Warhammer Fantasy Army book on the vampire counts, where it talks about a couple of grave robbers stumbling into the tomb of a Strigoi, and the Strigoi just starts mouthing a spell, and one of the grave robbers just disintegrates to dust through old age before the other one's eyes in just a few seconds, starts aging horribly into decrepitude. And they didn't think that a Strigoi could do that. That's really interesting. But instead, we have this faith cardinal, magic, religious icon, like, not necessary to the faction. It's flanderizing. It's like, well, you got the 100mm boss who you know is the head vampire. Well, here is the space pope, and you know he is like the morale and religious icon and the spellcaster. Unnecessary. And this, the Royal Decapitator, they love decapitators in their factions. You know, you got the Lord of Executions in 40k, you've got a couple of different types of executioners, like Lycon the executioner in the Nighthaunt range. Yeah, well, here's another executioner for you, and in another undead army. So let's just cover the same ground, shall we, with our miniature designs. What would have been more interesting to me here is having it being some sort of crazed cannibal unit. You know, maybe holding someone that they're about to eat alive in their hands. Like, you know, like one of those new Cities of Sigmar guys could be on his knees on the base being held, you know, with a terrified look on his face, and this guy is about to go in to eat him. You know, maybe it's on a diorama type base, because that's become very popular with characters. And he could be surrounded by ghouls who are starting to rip him apart. Think, what was it, Day of the Dead? The third Romero zombie flick? When Joe Polano's character gets ripped apart by the zombies in the hallway. That would be really cool to see. Look it up. If you haven't seen it, look it up. You'll get exactly what I mean. So overall, I guess these are a win. But they've lost a lot of the personality that made them really interesting in old Warhammer Fantasy. So then we get our Assault Marines. 18 months late, on the back of dozens of tanks and re-sculpts of tactical squads, we finally get an Assault Squad. And it's... Look, let's let's not be rude here. They did the right thing in bringing these out. We, as a community, needed these miniatures for 30k. Because plastic, affordable, easy-ish to assemble assault squads are a must-have for Horus Heresy, because so many factions are reliant on them, especially factions like the Blood Angels, maybe Raven Guard, Night Lords. All three of those are really going to utilize them. Fantastic. But enough of the Mark 6, okay? We got a Stormseer model recently, Space Marine Champion model, Librarian, Esoterrorist, they're all in Mark 6. Mark 6 is a fine armor. It's an armor I really like. But Mark 6 is like the ice cream sundae of armors. Yeah, it's nice to have every once in a while on a Heresy model, but if you have it all the time, your teeth are going to rot, and you're going to feel sick, and you're probably going to get diabetes. That's Mark 6 in a nutshell, and also, you know, you can't go back and play all those Great Crusade games, because part of what's interesting about the Horus Heresy model range was, especially in the first edition, all of the miniatures, and Alan Bly even said it in the interviews over on the Forge Your Visual feed, was the idea was you could go and play Great Crusade games, and they even suggested how you could use the 40k codexes of the time, 6th edition at the time, to play games of set in the Great Crusade. And the idea was, yep, you just use the 6th edition army lists, like for Eldar, for Necrons, whatever, but you get to use the Force Org chart from the Horus Heresy, and you get to use any Imperial armor units that fit into that Force Org chart. So what an easy way to do it, okay? And of course, there are many fan-made lists and such since then. So if I want to go and play Great Crusade games, Mark 6 armor. And that's not going to do it for me. And it's not going to do it for many people due to the fluff, the background of their factions. So think Death Guard, Iron Warriors, Iron Hands. None of these guys are using Mark 6 in huge numbers. Salamanders, another one. The White Scars, another great example, because the White Scars, they've sort of been retconned into having a bit of Mark 6. Retcons happen, right? Let's not dwell on it. But they've been fighting in Chondax. They've been fighting an isolated part of the Great Crusade, and they've been basically cut off for about 12 years from the wider Imperium, just sending the occasional ship back and forth to get resupplies of things like bolt gun ammunition and crack grenades. Right? Nothing amazing, but they've been purging orcs in this isolated system. So why are they getting these huge resupplies of Mark 6 armor? They're basically cut off from supply lines. And then, of course, with the breakout of the Horus Heresy, supply becomes an issue. And I like to bring it up because people think I just have an inherent bias against the Mark 6. I just think it takes me out of the story, my investment in the narrative. As for looks-wise, they look fine. They're very chonky because they've got this additional plate of armor over the chest. An identical plate of armor on every miniature for some reason. Like same buttons and stuff in the locations, whatever. Looks fine, but they look more like destroyers, because destroyers tend to have the same power armor, but slightly up-armored. So maybe an interesting destroyer conversion could be made out of these. Put some right-handed bolt pistols on them, maybe change the helmet out to something. Maybe I'll have a crack at making a Mark 6 destroyer helmet. That might be a fun one for me to 3D sculpt. But the only thing I don't like on them is the backpack. That's the actual don't like on these miniatures. And the backpack it's too small. Small worked for Mark IV backpacks because the Mark IV jump pack, which you'd be familiar with on the Sanguinary Guard in 40k, it's a single nacelle of the other backpacks. The other jump packs, the Mark VII and the Mark II jump packs, where you've got these large, big, round nacelles. The Mark IV, simplified it down to you've got the one nacelle, but you've also got the two little stubby nacelles of the normal backpack in there, and then, you can add wings or whatever it may be. These look like they kind of want to be like the 3.5 Chaos Raptor jump packs, but they're so much smaller. They terminate not far below the shoulder pads below the top edge of the shoulder pads in height. They don't even make it to the lower back. I feel like the backpacks are probably 15-20% too small at least. And they probably need to be a little bit bigger. They're based off that sort of new Dominion Zephon style jump pack. And yeah, I don't know. I would change it personally. Out of these miniatures, interesting to see, they've included combat shield in there in the style of the new Fafnir Ran type shield, or the new consoles over at Forge World, especially the Imperial Fist Terminator. Very similar shield to this, with this sort of slotted trim look that they love doing at the moment. They put it on all the characters, this slotted trim. They love it on shoulder pads, around neck gorgets, on knee pads. Very, very common. It was the style at the time. Hopefully there's a decent number of shields in these kits, as well as special weapons and such. I don't want to be having to buy upgrade kits to make these squads work on the tabletop. Also want to point out the bolt pistol arms and the chainsword arms are very different to the despoiler arms released over at Forge World. Probably because the despoiler arms are knocked down in 5 minutes. Necromunda, I'm skipping Warcry. Not that interested at all in 4 goblins or whatever they are for Warcry. But the Ventor is a classic Forge World vehicle from the Elysian range. It's now existing in plastic. I mean, it makes you shake your head because you go, well, why didn't you just release the Elysian range with these 10 years ago? You would have sold so many there, the height of their popularity. So it's great to see it now. I think it's a fantastic vehicle. Interesting choice of faction that they've given it to. Hopefully people very quickly on the internet sculpt alternative crew that can be 3D printed to take the place of them, to put these into armies like the Elysians. So I think they did a fantastic job with the sculpt. Yep, these energy looking weapons look awful. They don't look Imperial at all. They look like Tau weapons. But the stubbers, they look fantastic. So, yeah, nailed it. Good work. Good to see these vehicles. Pity it took so long. Then we have the Night Lords release, which is... It's the Chaos Space Marines basic set, but with a couple of different arms, shoulder pads, and heads. So we've seen this sort of thing performed a few different times in Kill Team boxes, but this is literally the Simpsons meme of Malibu Stacy got a new hat. It's literally Malibu Chaos got a new hat. Because what else can you say? It's the normal Chaos Space Marines, just with some extra bits. I do like this totem, although the Marine's body on it is a bit small. That's a Firstborn Marine. That's what I'm going to say. That's a Firstborn Marine scale, not a Primaris torso. And it's better for it. Needs that small scale on there, I think, to not make the totem look grotesquely misproportioned. Interesting that it's got the big Chaos star on there, like for the Night Lords to really be following Chaos. Didn't really get that vibe from them through all the stories I've read over the years, that Night Lords are more they'll work with Chaos, but they're not working for Chaos type faction, very much like the Iron Warriors. The Word Bearers are the polar opposite. They are definitely working for Chaos. So, yep, cool. Nostrum and Chainglaive in there. That's a nice touch. Some of the heads, like that ribbed bone head, nah, that looks awful. But this bear head with the, I guess, Chaos Star emblazoned on his forehead with the little winglets coming out of the face, that looks really good. And then, of course, this is my new favourite miniature on the bottom left. This guy I'm going to refer to as Mole Ninja. So Mole Ninja here has his tactical pistol, which he's put a rail system on. He's put a scope on there. He's put a bayonet on there. Don't forget he's got his giant Rambo knife coated in a thick viscous goop, which is apparently some delicate poison that no one's going to notice. But of course, because we Flanderize our miniatures, it has to be this big, thick goop. It can't be a subtle detail. He also has his little hip flask, which is emblazoned with the logo for the Night Lords, trademark Games Workshop 2023. And of course, he's got his cool, I watch Call of Duty. I've got my Ghost from Call of Duty mask on with my skull and a hoodie over the top because I'm an edgelord. So yeah, this is Mole Ninja, and he is the new mascot of the Outer Circle, I think, because this model is stupid. And what else can you say? And then on the Sergeant here, the Sergeant has this sword, which is kind of cool, until you sort of pan around it and you see you can't hit anyone with it because it's got a giant 25-kilo gold ribcage. Really cool concept art. Doesn't translate to a finished model. And the twin lightning core thing looks horrid. They look awful. Yeah, there's some great bits in this set, but there is some really crap bits in this set. But please, people, fandom, don't start going on a forum saying, "Oh my god, the Night Lord's getting a release. Is Conrad Kurz coming back in 40k?" It's just cringe. Just let it go. Let it go. And finish up with the Old World, which is this really bizarre release. So Eddie from Iron Maiden, once again, emblazoned on this miniature. For those who don't know, I think it's Power Slave was the album, where Eddie's in Egypt, Iron Maiden album cover. Look it up. That's him. That face is him for 100%. That dead Egyptian skinless cat, that's going to become a meme. I guarantee it. People will be, in the live chat, the live stream, people going meow. Okay, so why do I say this is a weird miniature? Well, Tomb Kings didn't need any bone dragon drake thing like this, because what the Tomb Kings had was they had their chariots. The chariots and their constructs, specifically like the stone idols, like the Necrosphinx, come to life. They were what, and the Hierotitan, they represented Khemri really well. And it's like if the monoliths of ancient Egypt in the real world came to life, the tomb guardians, that sort of thing. Cool. Instead, this here is more like traditional necromantic sort of creature. I like the crocodile head on it, although I think it needed to be just a crocodile head, not this weird Triceratops crest slapped onto the back of it, and it looks like it's slapped on. And then I started looking at this more closely, and look at the face. It's got so much detail going on. It's like super craggly, there's all these joints in the bone where all the different plates of the bone are fused together, and teeth coming out in all different angles. Like, you look at that skull. There is so much detail going on in that skull. And then you look at the rest of the model, and they're just big, smooth plates of bone with maybe a little bit of pitting occasionally, a little bit of hard edging to them, a little bit of sharp lines at the knuckles, and that's about it. All the rest of it's just dead smooth. It's like the sculptor spent all this time working on the miniature, sculpting the face of it, and one of the guys in the office is showing it off to another colleague, and he's like, "What do you think? This is what I've sculpted." And his colleague's like, "Oh, that's great, man. How's the rest of the model going?" He's like, "Oh, I haven't started that yet." He's like, "Well, it's due tomorrow, right?" "Oh, shit. Oh. And he quickly rushed out the rest of it and just left all of that hyper detailing off. And I can't unsee that, because just look at it. Look at the knuckles on the wing here. Every one of them is just a smooth plate of bone. It doesn't have any of this gnarly, and probably because this gnarly head is based on a real crocodile skull. They might have scanned one in 3D, or they looked it up, online as sculpting reference, and it looks fantastic because of it. But the rest of the bones, the rest of the anatomy, it's all just too crisp and smooth, and it doesn't look right. So not only does it not fit the faction in the Old World, but there's weird stuff going on with the sculpt. And then, of course, at the tail end, it turns from bone into these obsidian-looking, just the paint job, or it looks like obsidian shards coming out of its tail. So, very, very odd. It would have made sense if it was mummified, maybe. If there were bandages wrapped all around it, and maybe the rotting mummified flesh beneath the bandages, so it was more like a mummified dragon came to life. That might have been more interesting than just being a bone dragon. So, and it's not something that Khemri was really needing. Old World Khemri, with the way it was set out, was really good as it was. They're spending resources on this when they could be spending resources to update old sculpts. Like, give us a new Cetra the Imperishable. Just has to look exactly the same, just updated, slightly scaled better, to suit his stature. Just give us some more detail on him rather than being this old, 20-year-old fine cast miniature. That would be far, far more interesting to me, more appealing, I think, than this is. And, yep, there's also a priest version on there. So you've got, like, priests and random tomb kings running around on this bone dragon, but Cetra has to ride around in a light chariot. Just, I don't want to see Cetra on this, for the record. He would look awful on this. Because that's not him. That's not his character. They're supposed to be analogues of ancient Egypt. They don't need giant dragons flying through the air and such. Waste of materials, time, resources, you name it. Totally silly. And also, why is it on this green tufted base? This is Khemri, Tomb Kings. They should be on sand. Sandy base. Not pastures of Northern Europe or something. Or a semi-arid lands. Like, no, the Khemri is a dead region. Nagash spell of death killed everything in the continent, basically, in that part of the continent. Unless they're following Bretonians back to Bretonia, this makes no sense. Anyway, that's it. That's the World Championship stuff in a nutshell. But one little thing I want to talk about, and that is this. These are the epic miniatures. These are not miscasts. These are not misprints, anything like that. If we zoom right in and have a look around, you can see the backfilling. So the two-dimensional molding process has limitations. Unless you want to add cores to a die, which are moving parts that move sideways in the die, as opposed to back and forth, like the two halves of the clamshell do. Unless you want to add cores in, this is what happens. You have to sacrifice the areas that would be hollow in between two parts of an object where the die cannot get into, where they intersect. So, because of that, you end up with this. And this is across the board on all of these bolt gun miniatures. You can see it. It is not a misprint. It is not a issue with the manufacturing or anything like that. It is a limitation of the molding technology, and it's present on every single one of these tactical marines. It's not present on the heavy support, but you can see the heavy support in areas like here. It's filled in between the cheek and the forearm, and when they take shots for promotional, you don't see this because they're promotional shots. They don't want to show you the flaws and issues with the miniatures. But unfortunately, the flaws and issues of the miniatures are inherently there. They're present. And I did ask a question yesterday of people, what did you think for the buy-in point for this? How much do you think it should cost? If you want to go and read that, I might do a video just on that topic. Basically, people came in at about a third of the British price. Was a very common consensus. Up to maybe half of the British price was what people were willing to pay for the system. And a lot of comparisons were made to other systems and how they handle their small sculpt miniatures and how much they cost and how ridiculous the cost of this system appeared to be to many people. Now, these are people who watch this channel, therefore they probably have some sort of bias because they probably think similar to myself. That's why they're watching the channel in the first place. But very interesting to see those opinions. Also, the tanks. Well, some people, I like assembling miniatures. I do. I find it a lot of fun. That's why I like doing conversions and kit bashes and things like that. But you can see on this tank here that all these separate parts, these little guns in the hull and sponsons, each side of the turret, the little commander in the top of the turret. There's a little commander up in here, and turret hatches. They're all separate parts. In fact, the Sicaran has side hulls. I think it's got 3 or 4 parts that make up the center hull. Assembling miniatures is fun. Hobby is fun. Okay? But I think, and this is why I bring this point up, because a lot of people said, I don't think it's an issue. Well, I'm glad you don't think it's an issue, but I think it will go very, very old very, very quickly when you have to assemble for 5 or 6 straight nights to make 60 points of rhinos. I think that's going to get very, very tedious very, very quickly, let alone painting them all. And not losing parts. Like, think how small the exhausts are on a rhino, and understand that those exhausts are all separate parts. So you've got 4 of those little exhausts for each rhino. Cut them off, don't drop them in the carpet. Good luck to you. Back with the outer circle. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.